today I will be talking about mission economy. How do we build dynamic public capabilities inside our public service in order to create creative bureaucracies? So in my first lecture, I talked about the need to debunk the myth behind the kind of clunky, bureaucratic, top-down, slow, inertial state versus the creative entrepreneur working in the garage of Silicon Valley. But unfortunately, sometimes that dichotomy is true. And I believe it's true because there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that by talking about it in this dichotomous, mythological way, that ends up being the kind of public sector that we create. We end up actually with boring bureaucracies that at best can fix markets, that don't actually welcome the kind of experimentation that we require within our public institutions in order to go after those really hard, bold goals that I talked about in the third lecture around my concept of the mission economy. And what's interesting is that all of this is sort of the result of an ideological position, right? That if the state is either not needed or at best needed to fix markets, that ends up actually also filtering down to the kind of training that we provide to civil servants. So the education, literally the curriculum. And even there, if you just think about the very different curriculum that we have in our MBA programs, Masters in Business Administration programs, just think of like the titles of the courses. They're really kind of funky, right? It's like strategic management, decision sciences, organizational behavior. There's a famous textbook called Rethinking the Mature Corporation. Why is that? Because we admit that the private sector is key to value creation. So the kind of training, the education, the curriculum given to top managers globally across the continents in business schools is all about thinking out of the box, being creative, being entrepreneurial, thinking about things like decision sciences, organizational behavior. The other side is this kind of boring way to talk about the state has done exactly the opposite. There's been a whole kind of stream of thinking coming out of public choice theory, how choices are made in the public sector, driven by writers like Buchanan, or new public management, the kind of thinking about what it means to treat public sector workers as managers that have actually brought into the public sector, first of all, a fear of doing anything more than fixing markets. So that idea of market failure theory has been used to design a curriculum very different from thinking about the state as a market shaper or a market co-creator. But also this idea that government might get captured, that there's nepotism, that there's corruption, all valid concerns. If that fear is being used to actually then design the thinking within the civil service, what you end up getting is not only market failure thinking, but the worry that government failure is even bigger than market failure. All of which basically amounts to government thinking as small as possible, taking up as little space as possible, with the fear that it might end up crowding out, that's the word that's often used, crowding out business enterprise. So this idea that you're crowding, you're taking up perhaps too much space, you will end up being a burden in the system, doesn't help to actually create that kind of mission economy. And don't forget, the mission economy is not about the state doing everything. It's not about a top-down institution. It's not about Big Brother deciding, what happens across the board. It is always going to be about setting up a dynamic public-private partnership with the capable, intelligence, knowledge creation, learning by doing ability. Trial and error, but learning from those errors, investing in that learning process itself required in both public and private. And so what I'm very interested in is, if we want that, then we're going to have to actually change the education. We're going to have to change the training. We're going to have to change the framing of what's required within our civil service and how our public organizations are run. And this is actually why I've, over the last year, set up an institution in London at University College London, a big, important global university. It's actually a new department, which is called the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. And for me, this was important because it was a recognition that we couldn't get better policy, which I definitely think we need, without a kind of reframe, a change in our mindset of what the public sector is for. The question is, what are the new kind of concepts and design challenges we require to create creative bureaucracies? Even that word is interesting, a creative bureaucracy. There's no reason why the word bureaucratic should be a negative word. We can have, edgy, dynamic, sexy bureaucracies, or really boring, inertial, top-down, vertical, slow bureaucracies. It depends what we think needs to happen within our public institutions.